Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event today. We have our USC Facebook Live, and we're here to discuss how parents and guardians can help their students make that transition into college life while trusting them to face the challenges that they may face while here. I'm Dr. Broderick Leeks, Vice Chair for Student Mental Health in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and also Director of Counseling and Mental Health. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and clinical associate professor of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Keck School of Medicine. In terms of my clinical specialties, I specialize in individual and group psychotherapy, the treatment of anxiety and panic disorders, as well as OCD, ethnic minority identity development, particularly for African-American clients and students, and the integration of psychology and spirituality. So good to see you all. And with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Dr. Tracy Tambasia to introduce herself.
Thank you, Dr. Leeks. Good morning, everybody. I'm Tracy Tambasia. I'm a professor of clinical education in the Rossier School of Education at USC. My interest in terms of research is focused on international higher education, higher ed policy, and issues that affect the practice of student affairs. I'm also very interested in minoritized student access and success in higher education. But prior to being a faculty member, I worked in student affairs administration for a long time. And I supervise offices such as residential life, counseling services, student life, disability services, financial aid. So I've worked with thousands and thousands of college students. And this year, I'm also president of the USC faculty. Dr. Leeks.
So let's get into it. So I think one thing that we definitely wanted to talk about was just kind of the transition experience to college. I think in the normal world, it's a tough transition for many. There's of course a lot of excitement and optimism about kind of the new chapter of the lives, while also a transition time, but especially in our time of COVID, it's definitely complicated that process. And so we definitely want to talk a little bit about kind of what that transition looks like naturally, but also within the COVID context. And so you have people, your students who are moving into a new environment, whether they're from Southern California or from across the globe. Even if they're local, there's still a pretty big shift that's occurring. And so you have like I said, the excitement and the optimism of new friends and new connections and new challenges, while also some of the fear and some of the anxiety about the unknown and some of the uncertainty. And of course, we know that uncertainty has heightened greatly during the pandemic. And so we want to talk a little bit about how to support your kids through this process. You spend a lot of time pouring into them and developing them and helping them try to launch. And so we'll try to tackle some of those things today, Tracy and I. I think one big thing, just in terms of expectations, I think, especially when you watch the media and you watch movies and you're like, oh, college, and what is that college experience going to look like? And it looks different for different people in terms of their expectations. But I think there's some interesting surveys and studies that have been coming out about this current crop of students who are entering university, and just, it's pretty split in terms of some are really happy with their college experience and have really appreciated it, while others have been disappointed with some of the changes or some of the practices that are in place to try to ensure safety. And this is, national data, not necessarily specific to USC. And some students came in, and according to this national study that came out, some students came in thinking that there would be no changes to the college experience with COVID. So they didn't think there was going to be any COVID restrictions. They didn't think there was going to be kind of any distancing, and then other students who were kind of expecting that and prepping for that mentally. So I think as you're talking with your students who are here already, just kind of checking in with them about how things are going, how are they enjoying their experience, any barriers that they're facing, and kind of helping with some expectation management, could be helpful in these unprecedented times. And then the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Tracy is, I think one of the big things that a lot of our students struggle with is this comparison. to their peers. And so some might look at their peers and say, well, they seem to be handling all this much better than I am. Something must be wrong with me. They're doing much better than I am. They've made a lot more friends. And so it's kind of this, this phenomenon where you're always kind of negatively evaluating yourself, or always the one down position. And we often tell students who come to see me or come to see our therapist at the center, and I also talked a lot about this with parents, is kind of trying to shift from this comparison mode. It's really easy, you know, to look at others and think that they have it all together and they're on their path. But we really do ourselves a disservice, especially when we compare our insides to other people's outsides. So, you know, your students are walking around with all of their insecurities, all of their self-doubt, all of their perceived kind of shortcomings, and then they're using that lens and applying it to other people where they don't know anything about what's going on for their peers internally, who are literally, and many of them are struggling with some of those same self-doubt, fears, shortcomings. And so I think if we can help them kind of ground themselves a little bit, recognize that a lot of students are in the same boat, and stop comparing kind of your internal experience to others external, that could be really, really helpful to help kind of settle them a little bit. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that as we go. But Tracy, you have such great experience. And so I'm curious some of your thoughts around just the transition piece to USC and universities in general.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Leaks. I do want to talk a little bit about academic transition, but I was so interested in two things. First, it's so funny because comparing was on my list too. I was going to talk, and I will talk a little bit about academic comparisons, because we know we have really high achieving students, and it's inevitable that they're going to compare themselves academically, their grades, you know, how they did on a certain exam. So I'll talk about that in a second, but I was so interested in what you were just talking about. So I want to ask you this before I talk about academic health. This survey about expectations, and you know, I also think about how students hear for so long that, you know, college, those are the best years of your life, right? So, you know, you're going to make friends, it's going to be transformative. And the reality is that there are actually some tough points as well. You know, there's going to be some loneliness, there's going to be feelings of, you know, questioning or confusion, and it's not a party like the whole time. And so I wonder if when you layer sort of the COVID fatigue on top of that, we talk about just what the last year and a half has felt like. I wonder if that also factors into the conversation about student expectations.
Yeah, you know, and I think that's part of the difficulty, is when you kind of have that, and the parents tell all their glory stories of, I remember what it was like to be in college, and the world has changed so much in the last couple of years, let alone the last, you know, couple of decades. And I think you're right on, in the sense that the normal kind of processes that people go through, that COVID overlay has really kind of complicated things. And you know, just the you kind of mentioned the fatigue piece. There's a psychological fatigue in terms of just constant uncertainty. You know, the financial, you know, our financial world is strained with some of the fallout from the pandemic. Health, students are worried about their own health, their family's health. Students have family members who've passed, and many of us in this Facebook Live have experienced loss. And so, and then you have, you know, the remote classrooms and Zoom, and even though I think I've been really proud of my own kids' school in terms of how they handled remote learning, and USC has done a phenomenal job in setting all that up. But it is different, and it is, we say Zoom fatigue, and even though we're on a Facebook Live now, but there is that kind of piece of where what technology has been able to open up has been really powerful, but it also has had an impact on us as humans. So I think people are coming in, and you know, they want their energy to be up, they want that excitement to be there, but then there's this kind of force is kind of pressing down. And I think if people can recognize that and own it and name it, then you can do something with it as you try to navigate.
That's right. Yeah, well said. I totally agree about voicing it is really important.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I had a couple of thoughts about academic transitions because this is a really exciting time for young people coming back to in-person learning for us at USC. But one of the things I've observed in my work with thousands of college students is that all students who come to college are motivated and excited to get started and to learn. But one of the things that they don't always realize is that their academic behaviors may need to change. So if you think about high school patterns or secondary school patterns, wherever they went to school, students probably had a particular schedule. They already sort of knew expectations of teachers. They knew how to manage certain courses and subjects. And in fact, they may have excelled in STEM courses or maybe in language courses, but sometimes that changes in college. And I feel that sometimes students and their families don't recognize that that could happen. So what worked in high school may not work now. So some examples are maybe students didn't have to study as hard on certain subjects because they really excelled in chemistry. But they come to college and they find that this chem class is just super difficult and they have to put more time. And it's surprising because they felt like, well, I always did well. I don't know what's happening now. And there, there's value in thinking about what's not working, but there's also value in realizing that sometimes patterns and behaviors need to change. It may take more time to study for certain courses that were easy before. You may have to reach out to tutoring. You may want to speak with your professor during office hours. Maybe you didn't have to do that before. But the value of that is that those things are very accessible at USC. Those things are accessible in college in general. Tutoring support, faculty access, asking for help, knowing that there are writing resources on campus. But those things are just really important. It's not helpful, by October, November to keep pushing on saying, no, I'm going to make this work on my own. I'm not going to ask for any academic help and I just need to study harder. That might be the case, but it may also be the case that maybe you need to study at a different time of the day. Maybe studying with friends and group work will be more helpful than studying alone. So I would really recommend that parents and families talk with students about academic adjustment as a real phenomenon and not assuming that what they did before is always going to work. Another thing that comes to mind as being really important at this time of the year is time management. And I know that seems super obvious. Obviously, high-performing students know how to manage time, very busy lives, but that changes as well because sleep patterns change. If students have roommates can be loud at times. There are interruptions, good ones and unanticipated ones. And students are often balancing work and school and activities and also living away from home. So adjusting to a new schedule and finding the time to sleep and finding the time to have recreation and study. Sometimes finding that balance takes several weeks or maybe even a month. So that's another issue that parents and families can help with their students and literally inquiring, not in a nagging way, but saying, hey, are you getting sleep? That affects mood. I'm sure Dr. Leeks has a lot more insight on this, but it affects mood and disposition. It affects wellness in so many different ways, right? Sleep is essential. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with right now, we can come back to it later. Dr. Leeks was, referring to this idea of independent problem solving, fostering independence. That is another really critical issue at this time. Students are transitioning, making decisions on their own. But balance with this independent problem solving that they need to get a handle on is also the awareness of when they need to ask for help. And that can be kind of tough, right? So again, we have high performing students who are really excited and we want them to be resilient. We want them to be scholarly and to be adaptable, but we also want to know that they are self-aware, they know when to ask for help, and they know when they need to solve a problem on their own and not to always ask for help at every step. So that is a challenge that I think faculty and also student affairs professionals and others who support students at USC are working on right now. It's that decision making, right? So what is the decision point here? What can you capably handle on your own? And when do you need to ask for help? So those are the things that come to mind, but let me pause there and invite Dr. Leeks to weigh in again.
I think those are all, excellent points and a lot of wisdom for our community. As you were talking, it kind of reminded me of when I, was starting as a freshman many moons ago. And I think, one of the things was transitioning to the environment. And of course, all of those doubts come up, like, you know, am I going to fit in? Am I going to do well here? And even though I had a stellar high school career, it's like you're starting new and you have to kind of figure out kind of where you fit in and if you can cut it. And I remember struggling. I had a calculus class my first semester, and I remember not going to my faculty member. And I had great relationships with all of my high school teachers, and I just did not go. I felt embarrassed. I felt ashamed that I couldn't figure out this concept. I, especially as a young man of color, didn't know how the professor was going to, you know, take it that I didn't understand a particular assignment. You know, stereotype threat was kind of sinking in, and so so it took a while to really kind of get to a point where I was like, hey, you know, I need to go seek this out if I want to be successful. And of course, I had a really amazing support system in our student affairs division of the university that I attended, and that person really helped, you know, let me know that I belong there, let me know that there was resources to help. And kind of gave me that sense of confidence so I can actually deliver on the skill set and the tools that I possess. And I think that's one of the big things is kind of, you know, a lot of students feel a little hesitant to reach out because they're like, well, if I go get tutoring, as you mentioned, or if I go talk to my professor, they're gonna know that I'm an imposter. They're gonna know that, you know, I don't really belong here. And I tell students often, you're admitted, you're here. Like, you know, this is a really competitive place. And so they didn't accidentally put your name on the list. You are here for a reason. And there's a whole division or whole divisions at this university to try to kind of enhance student success, whether on the academic side, the student affairs side, or the health system side. And so we have jobs to help you get there. That's why, you know, we're here to help you kind of reach your goals. And it's not seen as a shortcoming. It's not seen as a failure. It's seen as you're being actually really wise and smart to use some of those tools. And so I think for the parents, kind of really helping point the kids to those resources, as you mentioned, Tracy, in terms of, hey, it's here. It's you know, there's such a stark kind of contrast. We have some students who are like, oh my God, USC has 1 million resources, and right. I'm going to Court-Shack Center for Learning and Creativity. I'm going to tutoring. I'm going to the Writing Center. I'm going to student affairs support. I'm going to the health system for support. And then other students are like, I didn't even know any of this existed, you know, and so really kind of helping them research and helping them see what's actually available, helping them talk to their academic advisors, their RAs, you know, to help them know, but then also kind of, as you mentioned, helping them be independent and saying, hey, so here's a resource. On your time, I would like for you to go check this out, or I really encourage you to check it out. Mm-hmm. And it takes time. I remember my mom, we had a friend of a friend was a really high administrator at my university. And so when I moved in, my mom and I went to go meet this administrator, and the administrator was like, anything you need, I'm here for you. I'll support you. And in my head, I'm looking at this person like, I don't think I'm ever coming back in your office again. And luckily, as I got older and more mature, my junior year, I finally started making kind of more of those connections on campus. But I think parents have to realize that, hey, we can point people, help them know, but sometimes it takes time for them to find themselves and get their comfort level. And it's not a bad thing. It's they're kind of figuring out and sometimes fumbling through the world. And I think we have to be okay with that, because sometimes it's like you want everything to line up perfectly, and growth and learning comes from some of those fumbles sometimes.
That's right. Dr. Leek, since we're sharing, I'm going to tell you that when I was an undergrad, I was deathly afraid of my French professor. He was so mean. And of course, I was terrible at French. So I never went to office hours either. So I had that same experience. But I think the other experience that I had, though, which I think pertains to some of our USC students as well, is my parents didn't go to college. And so, that is a situation in which, and I know that we have fantastic parents in our community who either weren't educated in the US or didn't go to college, and they are so proud and want to be engaged in the lives of their students. And I would say my parents were so proud of, my time. I was at Occidental. I'll name the college I went to for my undergrad. And it was such a great transformative experience. And it was really important that they were still supportive and engaged. They asked questions about my experiences. And they asked lots of questions, which was totally okay because they wanted to understand what was available. And today, I think parents would look on websites, right? But back then, there weren't websites. So, but I think that that's really important to recognize is that parents and families are real assets to our students. And that just because students are here, even if they're far from home, that those, family and community assets, extended family members, parents, siblings, those are all really important strengths that the students bring. And, I would hope that they would remain engaged, ask questions, and to also, say, hey, encourage them to go to office hours. Don't be afraid of your French professor, and make use of those resources.
And I love what you said before, because it's this balance of how do you support and point to, but then also step back a little bit. And it's tough. I always tell people, tell our parents, you're learning how to parent an emerging adult, and your kid is learning how to become an emerging adult. And there's a lot of highlights and cool moments in that, but also a lot of stuck points and frustrations as y'all are trying to work out that relationship. And that's the piece where it's tough, especially when you kind of help manage their lives, and not that is stopping once they get to university, but they have these terms. Sometimes they're said in a pejorative way, but the helicopter parents or the snowplow parents, where the helicopter parents are kind of hovering and making sure everything is good, and then the snowplow parents are coming in and paving the way and clearing out any obstacles or barriers so their kids can launch and succeed, and not putting a negative or a value on any of those, but it's kind of like, hey, how do I shift, and how do I evolve as my student is evolving, to kind of help them learn the processes of advocating and reaching out for resources and connecting with people, and also how to find their home. USC is a large campus, it's very diverse, a lot of different opportunities, and sometimes students, they just click and they find their group and they just take off, and other students, it takes a little while to kind of find their niche. But there's a lot of supports, whether it's identity-based supports, whether it's interest-based supports, whether it's academic-based supports, where students can kind of have a little more structure to try to find those groups, if they're just not kind of happening organically as fast as they would like. And so, again, it's kind of that process of, hey, like, here's some resources, and like you said, there's a ton of stuff on the internet, and then kind of helping point them in that direction. So they have their home base and their group, and then they can maybe take some more risk in trying out some of those things.
Dr. Leeks, what would you say to advise parents or first-year students, for example, who've never been out of their home area? Like they grew up in, let's say they grew up in one community, and they come and moments of like feeling lonely or eating alone. So I know that that can be really difficult for a young person to like, go to the dining hall and grab something to eat, and not having that instant friend group or that long held friend group. What would you say? Like, what kind of advice would you give them?
Yeah, and it's tough because, the perception is everybody else is organically just making friends left and right.
Of course.
And it's friends are falling from the sky, and
they grow on trees. Friends are everywhere.
Yeah, and it's tough because, and if it's not happening for you or for the student or for the parents, if it's not happening for your child, it's tough because you want them to be successful, you want them to have a social life, you want them to have a community, and loneliness is a thing, and especially as you're walking through campus, you see all this laughter and all these people are having fun, and I always kind of remember the phrase from that poem. It's like water everywhere, but not a drop to drink. And it's like, well, friends everywhere, but I don't have someone to connect to. And so I think there's a lot of different avenues and routes that students can go, like I said, to get some more structured kind of activities that to increase the likelihood that some of those more organic connections can take place. So especially if students are living on campus, we have an amazing residential education program. I'm actually a faculty in residence. I live on campus and in some of the residential colleges, and I've been here for 4 years, and I just signed up for another 4. And so the RAs actually meet with students regularly. And then there's professional staff, the RCCs kind of put on programming, and of course the faculty. And we've seen a huge increase in engagement post-COVID. We had decent engagement before, but they're coming out in droves to some of the Res Ed events because they want that sense of community. And it really touches my heart when we have students over to our place for dinner. And I'm like, oh, how did y'all meet? And they're like, oh, we went to this Res Ed event and we just happened to bump into each other. We've been best friends since. And so, and then for, our identity-based groups, student equity and inclusion programs, there's pretty much a designated office for all of the different ethnic identity groups, also the LGBTQ plus, first gen groups. I mean, there's a lot of, we have veterans groups or Veterans Resource Center. And so there's a lot of structure in place that students can maybe go, and then they're like, it's kind of an instant community. And then there's also professional staff who can kind of help push some of those relationships and help connect. Because we know it's tough, especially, people have been out of practice in terms of socializing for the last 18 months or so.
That's right.
It might take a little bit to kind of transition back. And we've actually been seeing that with some of our students who are coming, just kind of having a little bit more difficulty kind of navigating relationships, making those connections. So I think as we're transitioning through the pandemic, we have to kind of refresh in some of those skills.
That's right. I see there's a question about how to make friends, especially for sophomores who may not be living on campus. And I would say that a lot of what Dr. Leeks was just saying about identity-based centers, but also clubs and organizations on campus. So if your student is not residing on campus in one of the residence halls, there's still lots and lots of opportunities, but it will take some effort. It will take a little bit of time, but I would encourage students to sign up to join. I think USC has 1,000 clubs, maybe a little bit more, but there are clubs and organizations around artistic interests, intramural sports, film. I mean, lots and lots of different things. And I would encourage sophomores or students who don't live on campus to go to some events, go to some meetings. And also, there are school-based clubs and interests as well. So if your student is, for instance, in the Marshall School of Business, there are business-based clubs and organizations where they might find individuals with similar interests, but also recreational. Sign up for a hiking club if that's what they like to do. Sign up to go surfing or running, and they can find some community that way. And actually, I think it's important for all students to have really diverse connections. So even if they just like business clubs, that they should sign up for different things so they can meet people from across campus and outside of their schools.
Yeah, and I know we're at time. We have a couple more questions that we'll answer, and then we can wrap up. And thanks for your engagement with some of the questions that are coming in. So we have a question about, I think the parents are like, hey, we can tell them about resources. We can kind of try to point them, but then kind of that next step of actually like executing on that appointment or making an appointment. There's a specific question about counseling. And, it's tough because if you see that your kid is struggling or you see that they might need some assistance, but they're not quite ready to do that, sometimes you just kind of like say it's there and, just kind of gently checking in with them, because you definitely don't want to get into a dynamic where you're forcing them to do something they're maybe not ready for. And now they're frustrated with you, you're frustrated with them, and then you're moving away from kind of what you're trying to accomplish, which is actually getting them to seek help. A couple things I'll say. USC has a really high participation rate in terms of students seeking services. And so I think sometimes normalizing it, that we have a lot of students who are seeking help. And it does not have to be a serious, life or death issue. We have some really serious concerns, but we also have some more routine, kind of lighter concerns that students can get support with. Sometimes there's a barrier, like in terms of going to like, it feels like a big deal to go see a professional counselor. And we have a program called Let's Talk, and it's a really informal program. Students can just sign up. There's not a clinical note attached. There's not kind of a formal process, but it kind of helps them just kind of see what it's like and kind of maybe get some support on whatever kind of topic they're seeking support with. We also have what we call solution sessions, and those are kind of one-time visits, or can be one-time visits where you come in with a very specific concern. And again, it's not like a all-out kind of therapy process. And so it's really kind of like, hey, it's there, gently checking in with them, letting them know that the resources are there, letting them know a lot of their peers are using the resources, but if they need lower entry points than a formal traditional therapy intake, they can do Let's Talk, they can do a solution session. We also offer a ton of workshops on sleep and relationships and anxiety management that are kind of more one-time things that kind of help, dip their toe in the water so they can kind of see the process. We have so many students who say, oh, I wish I would have done this earlier. But sometimes it just takes a minute for them to kind of get their grounding and get comfortable enough to actually pursue the resource. But definitely don't get into a push and pull or this fight, because I think it'll just lead to a lot of frustration. Yeah.
Dr. Leaks, I see there's one quick question about talking to someone other than an assigned advisor. So I'm just going to answer that real quick, if that's okay. So this is one of those it depends responses. So the question is, where can my first year student go for advice if she wants to talk to someone other than her assigned advisor? And it depends a little bit, because some programs only have one assigned advisor per the program, because it depends on the size. And other programs are quite large, where they have a pool of advisors. One thing your student can do is to see if they're open advising hours. So sometimes there are so office hours that are broad, right? So it's a pooled advising time. So every Wednesday at 3 o'clock, you can just show up and ask a quick question. So that's one way to actually show up and see if there are other advisors there. The other possibility is to talk to a faculty member or a department secretary, for instance, someone else in the department, to get a sense, who all are the advisors? Do they have specializations, to get a better sense of whether you could just make an appointment to see somebody else. So that's what I would advise. I know that's not very specific, but it will depend on the size of the department, how many advisors there are.
So thank you so much. And we're about out of time. So just actually want to say thank you to Tracy. It was a pleasure serving on this panel with you. And thanks to all of our guests and our audience who joined us today on our USC Facebook Live. Appreciate you. Please reach out if you need any support, and fight on.
Yeah, thank you. It was a pleasure.